I couldn't help quickly responding to Greg Clarke's resignation this morning. I just wanted to get on it like a car bonnet, so to speak, because I think it's a massive teaching moment in relation to handling and dealing with bias-related issues in the workplace. Now, I couldn't help thinking when Greg came up with those comments in Parliament that he hadn't come up with those before. I'm sure he had, but the problem is that nobody was equipped with the skills to call it out. And as a result, we have a person resigning maybe before their time. He would have resigned. He would have left naturally in a couple of years. And there was a missed opportunity within his working environment. And if we look at the three issues that were brought up, one was of him calling black footballers coloured footballers. Now, to me, when I first heard that, I just sort of thought, well, this is a generational thing, and I kind of understood in a weird way, even though some people may disagree with me. But then I heard the litany of other faux pas, and I could see how his position became untenable. But what if you were able to call out those faux pas in the moment? And that's what's led to this, and that's why this is very important for me to raise at the moment. What if the people he worked with could call out those faux pas in the moment when they happened? Suddenly we wouldn't be in this situation. He'd still be in the job, and arguably better in that job, because he would be far more sensitive to these types of bias-related issues. Now, let's just have a look at each of the points that were raised, which led to his to untimely resignation, if you like. So the first point was calling black players coloured. Right. Now, if I were on the receiving end of that, or if I wasn't on the receiving end, and if it was a white counterpart of mine that was on the receiving end, using our IDU methodology and coming from a place of dispassionate developmental inquiry, it would be easy to say to Greg, to say, look, Greg, just out of interest, I noticed you referred to black players as coloured. I'm just curious as to where you were coming from with that perspective in terms of describing black players. What's the matter with that? That's a simple question. It's not rude. It's not arrogant. It's dispassionate. It doesn't have any negative energy in it. He's going to respond. He's going to respond to that. So I don't know what his response would be, but it might be something along the lines of, "Oh, that was the name that's the name that we that's how I normally describe people of black ethnic origin." And then you can say, "Well, yeah, but can you understand how that might be perceived as a derogatory, or because it implies that being coloured is less than perfect, than the perfect being white." Aryan, for example, and then he would answer because he's an intelligent man, and suddenly the bias calls itself out. I've even been a bit forward there. You wouldn't even, just from the first question that I'd asked, the bias would call itself out, and we get into a conversation which would be non-confrontational, and we would agree next steps. And I guess the next step would be, oh yeah, look, I can see why this actually could be quite offensive. And I really didn't look at it from this perspective. It's just a generational thing. And I'll keep that in mind. And next time I'll be wary of describing people of black ethnic origin in that way. And it's done, it's dusted, and we move on. But the difference here is that he, as the CEO or chairman, would be so sensitive to this kind of infraction, if you like. And as a result, it would have a dramatic impact on the FA as a whole, and football and players and people that they work with. It would have a huge impact on dispositions in relation to race. So that was the first one. Now let's have a look at the second one. The second one was focused around gay footballers making a life choice. Yeah, again, the same type of question. I was just curious to know from your perspective, just for my understanding, just for my development, where you were coming from with that type of with your description in terms of life choice. I didn't really understand it. The person's going to respond. He's got to respond. So he's going to say something along the lines, I guess, because I'm not him. He's going to say, well, I think, people make a choice, a sexual preference choice. And that's what I was referring to. And then I might say, if I was the person, I might say, yeah, but this isn't an actual choice from something which I'm doing wrong. And it looks like that you're saying that that's an imperfect way of living, or an imperfect type of sexual choice. And then he'll say, well, that's not where where I was coming from. And then suddenly it's just out in the open. It's called itself out. And we'll have a conversation about it. He doesn't even have to apologize because, frankly, I can talk from a black perspective. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm just looking for an awareness of the insensitivity. From a homosexual perspective, I'm not sure. Maybe that, if the person wanted an apology, then they could have an apology. But I don't think it would require an apology. It just requires an awareness and a sensitivity to things that you say, which can be perceived in a denigratory, offensive way when they come from a conditioned place. And this is why you have to interrupt the conditioning. And the best way to do that is to come from a place of dispassionate, developmental inquiry. And what you'll find is that it fast tracks, expedites the pace at which you recondition people in relation to their views, which can be perceived as negative and can be offensive to some people. Now let's have a look at the third. The third one was relating to women playing football. And when the balls hit at them, it's harder. And I think the inference is that they're less strong or something when the ball hits them, and they're more likely to scream or be in pain or something like that. I think that was the inference. Again, this is I would suggest that this might be a generational thing, and maybe a male chauvinistic trait. But the key here is to be able to call it out. And again, I'm sure he'd made comments like that at work. But the problem is that when he made those comments, people were either embarrassed, they cringed, were offended. But the most important thing is that they didn't say anything. They didn't call it out. So they are complicit in his resignation as much as he is, even though he made the mistake. Or rather, maybe not complicit in his resignation, but complicit in the environment which is conducive to that type of thinking. So again, how would you call that out? I would just say, just for my own development, just so that I can understand. I mean, what criteria did you use to come to the conclusion that women hit by a ball would make them more fragile than a man? And then he's going to have to explain. And again, he's just going to explain because of the way I asked it wasn't in an aggressive way. I'm coming from a place of developmental inquiry. And when he answers, in his answer, it will become obvious that he's coming from a place of bias. So the bias calls itself out. And that's the key. Right? So that's why we encourage people to leverage the IDU methodology, because it has a massive impact in reconditioning individuals. And my point with this is that, Greg, whatever you think of him, for better or for worse, coming from that generation with that type of attitude, and I'm not saying everybody from that generation has that type of attitude, but from those people from that generation with that type of perspective, if he had that perspective and if he had the reconditioned perspective and was still in the job today, what an impact that would have on the FA. So there was actually a fourth comment. And that fourth comment, if I read it directly, was if you go to the IT department at the FA, there's a lot more South Asians than there are Afro-Caribbeans. They have different career interests. Now, I don't know what you read into that, or if you read anything into that, if that just sounds like a normal observational statement. But that's the point. Because I can tell you for a fact that some Afro-Caribbean people of black ethnic origin hearing that would see that as a denigratory statement about people's ambitions, about their ambitions. Now, to know whether that is or not, I would encourage them to come from a place of dispassionate developmental inquiry. Essentially, what you're saying is, I don't understand. So you'd look to understand where the person is coming from, even though a major part of you would be thinking that this person has old-fashioned attitudes and is coming from a denigratory place. The best way to deal with that is just to simply say, look, from my perspective, just for my development, I'd appreciate if you could just elaborate on what you meant by that. Then the person's going to answer. And again, the bias will call itself out, or it won't, as the case may be. I'm pretty sure in that situation, based on those comments, the bias would call itself out. And then you can use dispassionate developmental inquiry to continue that conversation. And what you'll find is full call out in terms of the bias, and then you can look to address it collaboratively and efficiently. And guess what? Some people say to me that their managers don't really care about their development, that they're hard-nosed, that they only care about themselves. Well, here's my point. When you come from a place of dispassionate developmental inquiry, the person on the receiving end, if they're a coach and they're coach-minded, will look to coach you, right, and tell you where they were coming from. If they're egomaniac type of person, what will happen is that will speak to their ego, and they'll say, well, let me show you. They may not say it that aggressively, but they'll say, yeah, I'll show you. And either way, it allows for the bias to call itself out, and then through dispassionate developmental inquiry, we can get to a place where we can actually deal with it. So IDU, always the way forward in these types of scenarios. And I just think, whatever you think of Greg, if he had that, if his people and he were equipped to deal with this type of situation, we would be in a better place for what he has said. And he would be in a better place for what he had said. And the whole of the FA would be in a better place for what he had said. And the ramifications for football would be huge.